In the spring of 1987, a demolition crew working on the old Brenner homestead in Rappahannock County, Virginia, made a discovery that would halt construction for 3 months. Behind a false wall, in what had once been the master bedroom, they found a lockbox containing 23 handwritten letters, a marriage certificate dated 1934, and a collection of photographs that documented something state officials had tried to bury for over half a century. The marriage certificate bore 2 names, Clement Brenner, age 47, and Sarah Brenner, age 19. But the shock wasn't in the shared surname. It was in the notation scrawled in faded pencil along the certificate's margin, written by the circuit clerk who had processed the license. Ward to Guardian. Sarah Brenner hadn't just married a man with the same last name. She had married the man who had legally raised her since she was 6 years old, and according to the letters found in that wall, she hadn't been given a choice. Before we go further, subscribe and comment with your state. These forgotten stories need witnesses, and you might be the only one who hears this one through to the end. The Brenner case didn't start with a wedding. It started with a death. In the winter of 1921, a tuberculosis outbreak swept through the mountain communities west of Sperryville, claiming 14 lives in 6 weeks. Among the dead were Jacob and Nora Whitfield, who left behind 3 children, a boy of 9, a girl of 6, and an infant who wouldn't survive the following winter. The boy was taken in by an uncle in Culpeper. The infant went to a church-affiliated orphanage in Charlottesville. But the girl, Sarah, ended up in the care of Clement Brenner, a 44-year-old bachelor who owned a modest timber operation and a 2-story house at the end of a gravel road that locals called Shroud Hollow. Brenner had no wife, no children, no apparent connection to the Whitfield family beyond geography, but he appeared before the county magistrate in March of 1921 with a petition for guardianship, claiming he had been a friend of Jacob Whitfield and wished to honor the deceased by raising the girl as his own. The magistrate, overwhelmed by the number of orphaned children and the lack of suitable homes, granted the petition without investigation. Sarah Whitfield became Sarah Brenner in name, though not by blood, and disappeared into Clement's home in the woods. For 13 years, no official record mentioned her again. It was only in 1934, when the marriage license was filed, that Sarah reappeared in the civic ledger, not as a child, but as a bride. And by then, according to those who would later speak in whispers to state investigators, it was far too late to save her. Shroud Hollow earned its name long before the Brenners lived there. The road wound deep into a densely forested valley, where morning fog lingered until noon, and the sun never quite burned through the canopy. There were only 4 houses along that road in the 1920s, and the families who lived there kept to themselves with a fervor that bordered on hostility. When a traveling preacher tried to hold a revival meeting there in 1926, he was turned away at gunpoint. When a census taker arrived in 1930, she reported that the residents refused to answer questions and warned her not to return. This was the world Sarah grew into. A school teacher named Margaret Dalton, who worked in a 1-room schoolhouse 3 miles from the Hollow, would later tell investigators that Sarah attended sporadically between 1921 and 1927, always arriving alone and always leaving before the other children. She never spoke unless directly questioned, never played with other students, and often bore bruises on her arms that she refused to explain. In the spring of 1927, when Sarah was 12, she stopped coming altogether. Dalton reported the absence to the county school board, but no one followed up. Truancy was common in the mountains, and a missing girl from Shroud Hollow wasn't considered unusual enough to warrant concern. But Sarah hadn't simply dropped out of school. According to the letters found in 1987, something had changed in the Brenner household that year. Something Clement had been planning for a long time. The 23 letters discovered behind the false wall were written over a span of 7 years, from 1927 to 1934. All were addressed to Sarah. None were signed, but handwriting analysis later confirmed they were written by Clement Brenner. The letters were never mailed. They had been kept, perhaps as a record, perhaps as a confession, hidden where no one would find them until the house itself was torn down. The earliest letter, dated April 1927, began with chilling simplicity. "You are 12 now, and it is time we speak plainly. You are not my daughter, but you are mine." The letters grew progressively darker. By 1929, Clement was writing in explicit terms about his intentions. He described Sarah as his future wife, referred to her 16th birthday as the beginning, and outlined rules she would follow once they were married. She would not leave the property without his permission. She would not speak to other men. She would bear his children and care for his home, and in return, he would provide for her as he always had. There was no affection in the letters, no romance, only possession. And Sarah, according to later testimonies from neighbors, had no means of escape. She had no family, no education beyond 6th grade, no money. Shroud Hollow was miles from the nearest town, and Clement controlled the only vehicle. Even if she ran, where would she go? Who would believe a girl from the woods claiming her guardian intended to marry her? By the time Sarah turned 18 in 1933, Clement's letters shifted from anticipation to impatience. In one, he wrote, "You will marry me in the spring, when the ground thaws and the preacher can travel. Do not think of refusal." He was right. On May 14, 1934, Clement Brenner and Sarah Brenner were married in a private ceremony at the Brenner homestead. The officiant was a traveling minister named Reverend Thomas Gaines, who had been paid $20, a considerable sum during the Depression, to perform the service without asking questions. Gaines would later claim he had no idea Sarah was Clement's ward, though investigators found this difficult to believe. The marriage certificate clearly listed Clement as Sarah's legal guardian in the space meant for relationship to bride, and Gaines himself had filled out the form. Still, the marriage was legal. Virginia law in 1934 had no provision prohibiting a guardian from marrying his ward once she reached the age of consent, which was 18. The relationship was morally grotesque, but technically permissible. The circuit clerk who processed the license had written his damning note. God forgive us all. But he stamped the document and filed it away, and the law moved on. Sarah became Clement's wife in every legal sense, and in the Hollow, where no one spoke of things that happened behind closed doors, the marriage was simply accepted as another dark inevitability. But those who saw Sarah in the years that followed noticed changes. A shopkeeper in Sperryville recalled Sarah coming in once, alone, in 1938, and staring at the door as if she wanted to run but couldn't remember how. And a logger, who worked occasionally with Clement, reported that the man spoke of Sarah not as a wife, but as property, something he owned, maintained, and controlled. Then, in 1941, something happened that finally brought outside attention to the Brenner house. In the summer of 1941, a county health inspector named Walter Pruitt was dispatched to Shroud Hollow following reports of unsanitary conditions and possible child neglect. The complaint had come from a postal worker who claimed to have seen a malnourished child through a window while delivering a package. Pruitt arrived at the Brenner homestead on a humid afternoon in July, accompanied by a deputy sheriff for safety. What he found was documented in a report that would remain buried in county archives until the 1987 discovery forced its release. Sarah answered the door. She was 26 years old, but looked a decade older, her hair prematurely grey, her face gaunt. She said nothing, only stepped aside to let the men enter. Inside, Pruitt found 3 children, a girl of 5, a boy of 3, and an infant who appeared severely underweight. When he asked Sarah about their health, she responded in a monotone, offering only yes or no answers. Clement was not home. He was working in the timber forest, but his presence was everywhere. Photographs of him alone, his chair positioned to oversee the entire room, his boots by the door like a warning. Pruitt attempted to examine the infant, but Sarah panicked, pulling the child away and begging him not to take it. The deputy intervened, calming her, and Pruitt managed a brief examination. The child was suffering from malnutrition and a respiratory infection. Pruitt recommended immediate medical attention and told Sarah he would return the following week. He never got the chance. 3 days after Pruitt's visit, the Brenner homestead burned to the ground. The fire started in the early hours of the morning and spread rapidly, consuming the old timber structure in less than an hour. Neighbors saw the flames from miles away, but didn't arrive in time to help. By the time the volunteer fire brigade reached Shroud Hollow, the house was a smoldering ruin. 4 bodies were recovered from the ashes: Clement Brenner, Sarah Brenner, and 2 of the 3 children. The 5-year-old girl was never found. Investigators assumed she had been consumed entirely by the fire, though some locals whispered that she had escaped into the woods and simply never returned. The official cause of death was listed as smoke inhalation. The cause of the fire was ruled accidental, a kerosene lamp overturned in the night, but Walter Pruitt never believed it. In a handwritten note appended to his original report, he wrote, "I do not believe this was an accident. I believe Clement Brenner knew we were coming back, and he chose to end it on his own terms." The note was filed away, and the case was closed. For 46 years, the Brenner story was forgotten. When the demolition crew found the letters in 1987, they brought them to the attention of a local historian named Dr. Evelyn Marsh, who specialized in Appalachian family histories. Marsh recognized the significance immediately and contacted state authorities. Within weeks, the Virginia State Police opened a posthumous investigation into Clement Brenner, and what they found painted a picture even darker than the letters suggested. County records revealed that Clement had petitioned for guardianship of Sarah under false pretenses. He had never been a friend of her father's. In fact, Jacob Whitfield had explicitly warned neighbors to keep Clement away from his children. But in the chaos following the tuberculosis outbreak, no one had checked Clement's claims. The magistrate, desperate to place orphaned children, had simply taken his word. Medical records from a now-defunct clinic in Culpeper showed that Sarah had been treated twice for broken bones during her time as Clement's ward, once in 1925, once in 1929. Both times, Clement claimed she had fallen. No one investigated further, and birth records revealed something even more disturbing. Sarah had given birth to 5 children between 1935 and 1941, not 3. 2 had been stillborn, their deaths registered but their burials never recorded. Investigators searched the property where the Brenner house had stood and found remains. Small bones buried in shallow graves behind what had once been the woodshed. The children had been buried in unmarked plots, without ceremony or acknowledgement, as if they had never existed at all. In the months following the discovery, Dr. Marsh conducted interviews with elderly residents of Rappahannock County who had lived in or near Shroud Hollow during the 1930s and 40s. Most were reluctant to speak, some refused entirely, but a few shared memories that filled in the gaps. A woman named Dorothy Klein, who had been a teenager in the 1930s, recalled seeing Sarah at a church service in 1936. She sat apart from everyone, Klein said. She didn't sing the hymns, didn't pray, just stared at the floor, and when Clement came to collect her, she flinched. I remember that. Hodge claimed that Clement once bragged about training Sarah to obey him, as if she were livestock. He said she tried to run away once, when she was 14, Hodge recalled. He caught her in the woods and brought her back, and a former postal worker, now in her 90s, remembered delivering mail to the Brenner house in 1940. I saw her through the window, she said. She was holding a baby, and she looked so tired, so hopeless. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what. Back then, you didn't interfere in a man's home. The pattern was clear. People had known something was wrong, but no one had acted. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Brenner case was how easily it had been allowed to happen. Virginia law in the early 20th century offered virtually no protection for wards in private guardianship arrangements. Once a guardian was appointed, they had near total control over the child's life, with minimal oversight or accountability. There were no mandatory home inspections, no requirements for periodic court reviews, and no legal mechanism for a ward to petition for removal from an abusive guardian. Even more troubling, the law placed no restrictions on a guardian marrying their ward. As long as the ward had reached the age of consent, the marriage was legal, regardless of the power imbalance or the circumstances under which the guardianship had been established. In Sarah's case, every institution that should have protected her failed. The magistrate who granted Clement guardianship never verified his claims. The school system never followed up on her truancy. The health inspector's concerns were never acted upon, and the law itself provided no barrier to Clement's ultimate act of possession, legal marriage to the girl he had controlled since childhood. It wasn't until 1978, 44 years after Sarah's forced marriage, that Virginia passed legislation requiring oversight of private guardianships and prohibiting marriage between guardians and their wards. By then, of course, it was far too late for Sarah. In the years since the Brenner letters were made public, psychologists and trauma specialists have analyzed the case as an example of extreme coercive control and long-term captivity. Dr. Clement didn't just control Sarah's body, Rourke explained in a 1992 paper. He controlled her sense of reality. From the age of 6, she was isolated, monitored, and conditioned to believe she had no identity outside of his household. By the time she was old enough to legally marry him, she likely couldn't conceive of an alternative. This wasn't seduction or grooming in the traditional sense. The letters support this analysis. Clement never expressed love or affection for Sarah. He expressed ownership. He wrote about her future as if it were predetermined, inevitable, a fact of nature rather than a choice. And in doing so, he eliminated the possibility of resistance. Sarah didn't need physical chains because the psychological ones were unbreakable. And when Walter Pruitt's visit threatened to expose the truth, Clement chose annihilation over accountability. The fire that killed Sarah and her children wasn't an accident. It was the final act of control. The ultimate assertion that if Clement couldn't keep them, no one could. Shroud Hollow still exists, though it's barely recognizable as the place it once was. The old Brenner property is now an empty lot, overtaken by wild growth, marked only by a few foundation stones and the remnants of a chimney. The other houses that once lined the gravel road are long abandoned, their roofs collapsed, their windows shattered. But locals still avoid the area. In the decades since the fire, Shroud Hollow has developed a reputation. People report feeling uneasy when they pass through, as if they're being watched. Some claim to hear a child crying in the woods at night, though no children live there anymore. And on certain mornings, when the fog rolls in heavy, drivers say they see a figure standing at the end of the road. A woman, pale and still, staring back at them with hollow eyes. Most dismiss these stories as folklore, the kind of ghost tales that emerge from any place touched by tragedy. But Dr. Marsh, who has spent years documenting the Brenner case, isn't so quick to dismiss them. Places remember, she said in a 2003 interview. Trauma leaves an imprint. Whether that's literal or metaphorical doesn't really matter. What matters is that people feel it. They feel the wrongness of what happened there. In 1995, a small group of women's rights advocates and historians raised funds to erect a memorial for Sarah Brenner. They petitioned the county to allow a marker to be placed at the site of the old homestead, bearing Sarah's name, her dates of life, and a single line. She deserved better. The petition was denied. County officials argued that erecting a memorial on private property required owner consent, and the current landowner, a timber company based in Richmond, refused. So Sarah remains unmarked and unremembered, except in the letters that condemned her and the documents that failed to save her. But her story has not been entirely forgotten. In recent years, the Brenner case has been cited in legal battles over guardianship reform, used as evidence of the need for stronger protections and oversight. It has appeared in academic papers on coercive control and domestic captivity, and it has been shared, quietly, among those who work to protect vulnerable children from the kind of systemic failure that allowed Sarah to disappear into Clement's house and never truly emerge. There is no justice for Sarah Brenner, no trial, no accountability, no reckoning. The man who stole her childhood and consumed her adulthood is long dead, and the systems that enabled him have been reformed, though too late to matter for her. The children she bore into captivity died with her, their bones buried in unmarked graves, their names lost to history. But in the mountains of Virginia, there are still people who remember the stories their grandparents told them, about the man in Shroud Hollow who took in a little girl and never let her go, about the house that burned in the night and the woman who never got to leave, about the marriage certificate filed in 1934, bearing the notation that still chills anyone who reads it. Ward to Guardian. The circuit clerk who wrote those words understood what he was witnessing. He knew it was wrong, but he stamped the paper anyway, because the law said he could, and no one was there to stop him. Sarah Brenner married the man who raised her, not out of love, but because she had been given no other choice. And when the fire came, it didn't free her. It only ensured that no one would ever have to answer for what had been done. The hollow is quiet now, but on certain nights, when the fog settles thick and the road disappears into shadow, some say you can still hear it, a voice, faint and distant, calling out from the ruins. Not crying, not pleading, just calling, as if searching for something that was taken long ago and never returned. And in the silence that follows, there is only the wind and the weight of a story that Virginia tried to bury, but could never quite forget.